September 20th, 1940. A young woman sits at a desk in a cramped Washington office, staring at rows of meaningless letters that have defeated America's best minds for 18 months. Outside, the world is collapsing. Hitler's armies are crushing Europe. Japan is preparing to dominate the Pacific, and the United States is blind, unable to read a single word of Japan's most secret messages. Then, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this 27-year-old woman who couldn't get hired to teach high school math sees something nobody else has seen. Within days, America will be reading Tokyo's deepest secrets. Her name is Genevieve Grotjan, and this is the story of how a railroad pension clerk accomplished what the Encyclopedia American Women at War would later call one of the greatest achievements in the history of American code-breaking. The late 1930s were humanity's slide toward catastrophe. Hitler had seized Austria and Czechoslovakia while the democracies watched helplessly. Mussolini was building his fascist empire in Africa, bombing villages and using poison gas against Ethiopian forces. And in the Pacific, the Empire of Japan was waging brutal war across China, committing atrocities that shocked the world's conscience. The League of Nations had collapsed under the weight of its own ineffectiveness. Diplomacy failed repeatedly as dictators grew bolder with each uncontested aggression. Every major power understood that global conflict was inevitable. The only questions were when it would begin, where it would spread, and who would ultimately prevail. For the United States, the greatest mystery was Japan. American military planners knew confrontation with Tokyo was coming, but they had almost no insight into Japanese intentions or strategy. What were Japan's war aims? What was Tokyo telling its ambassadors in Berlin and Rome? What secret agreements existed between the Axis powers? Were the Japanese planning to strike north against the Soviet Union, or south toward the resource-rich colonies of European empires? The answers to these questions could mean the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death for millions of American soldiers and sailors. Japan understood that keeping communications secure was essential to strategic plans. The element of surprise was central to Japanese military doctrine. If America knew what Tokyo was planning, that advantage would be lost. So in February of 1939, the Japanese Foreign Ministry introduced a new cipher machine for its most sensitive diplomatic traffic. Japanese engineers had studied the German Enigma machine, which used rotating wheels to scramble messages through complex electrical circuits. But the Japanese designers went further. They created something even more sophisticated. They called it the Type B cipher machine, or the 97 alphabetical typewriter, named for the Japanese year 2597 in the imperial calendar. American codebreakers would give it a simpler name. They called it Purple because they kept their files on the cipher in purple folders, to distinguish them from earlier Japanese systems designated with other colors. Purple was a masterpiece of encryption engineering. Unlike the German Enigma, which used rotating wheels called rotors, Purple employed telephone stepping switches, the same technology used in automated telephone exchanges across America. This made the machine incredibly complex. A message typed into Purple passed through layer after layer of electrical switching, each layer scrambling the letters in a different pattern. The possible combinations numbered in the billions. A person trying to crack Purple by brute force, testing every possible key setting, would need more time than the age of the universe. The machine worked by dividing the 26-letter alphabet into two groups. 6 letters, typically vowels, were enciphered by one mechanism. The remaining 20 letters were enciphered by a separate, far more complex system of 3 interconnected stepping switches. The two groups were then recombined to produce the final ciphertext. This division into 6s and 20s, as the American codebreakers called it, was both a source of strength and, as it would turn out, a fatal weakness. The Japanese Foreign Ministry believed Purple was unbreakable. They trusted it completely. Through Purple, Tokyo would communicate its most important secrets to ambassadors across the world. Instructions for negotiations with Washington, reports on conversations with Hitler, strategic assessments of the war in Europe. All of it flowed through the Purple cipher, and Tokyo was confident that no one could read a word. For 18 agonizing months, they were right to be confident. America could intercept the Japanese messages easily enough. Radio signals crossed the Pacific, and American listening stations captured them by the thousands. But intercepting a message and reading it were entirely different things. The intercepted traffic was just meaningless jumbles of letters without the key to decrypt it. Purple had defeated every American attempt to crack it. Genevieve Marie Grotjen was born on April 30, 1913 in Buffalo, New York, a city of factories and immigrant families on the shores of Lake Erie. She was the only child of Frederick Grotjen, a pharmacist whose parents had immigrated from Germany in search of opportunity. Her mother kept a comfortable middle-class home, managing the household while Frederick built his business. There was nothing in her background suggesting she would become one of the most important figures in American intelligence history, but from an early age, Genevieve displayed a remarkable gift for mathematics. Numbers made sense to her in a way they didn't make sense to other children. She could see relationships and patterns that others missed entirely. While her classmates struggled with algebra, memorizing formulas and grinding through procedures they barely understood, Genevieve raced ahead, finding elegant solutions to problems that stumped her teachers. Mathematics wasn't work for her. It was play. It was exploration. It was a language that revealed hidden truths about the structure of the world. By high school, she decided what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to become a mathematics teacher and share her love of numbers with the next generation. She imagined standing in front of a classroom, watching the moment of understanding dawn in a student's eyes, knowing that she'd helped unlock a mind. Teaching mathematics wasn't just a career choice for Genevieve, it was a calling. She enrolled at the University of Buffalo, throwing herself into her mathematics coursework with passionate dedication. She was an outstanding student, earning the highest marks in virtually every class. Her professors recognized her unusual ability and encouraged her to pursue advanced work. She studied not just the procedures of mathematics, but the underlying theory, the deep principles that connected different branches of the discipline. In February of 1936, she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mathematics, the highest honor the university could bestow. Her professors praised her abilities in the strongest terms. Her future seemed bright. Surely, with credentials like these, she'd have no trouble finding a teaching position at a high school or perhaps even a small college. She began sending applications to schools across the region, confident that her qualifications would speak for themselves. But the Great Depression had devastated the American economy. 1/4 of the workforce was unemployed. Factories stood idle. Banks had failed by the thousands. Jobs were scarce everywhere, and teaching positions were no exception. Schools were closing, not hiring. Districts that had employed multiple mathematics teachers were consolidating, letting staff go rather than bringing new people on. The few positions that did open attracted dozens or even hundreds of applicants. Despite her exceptional qualifications, Genevieve Grotjen couldn't find a single institution willing to employ her as a mathematics teacher. She sent application after application. The rejections piled up on her desk. Month after month passed with no offers. She watched as classmates with lesser credentials found positions through family connections or simple luck. But for Genevieve, a summa cum laude graduate, the doors remained closed. It was a bitter experience. She'd done everything right. She'd worked hard. She'd earned the highest honors, and none of it seemed to matter. The world didn't care how talented she was. The world needed fewer mathematics teachers than it had mathematics graduates, and Genevieve was simply unlucky enough to have been born at the wrong time. Finally, in need of income and tired of waiting for an opportunity that might never come, she took what work she could find. The Railroad Retirement Board, a federal agency that administered pension benefits for retired railroad workers, was hiring statistical clerks. It wasn't the career she'd dreamed of. It had nothing to do with teaching, but it was honest work and it used her mathematical abilities. So Genevieve Grotjen, summa cum laude graduate with dreams of inspiring young minds, went to work calculating how much money retired railroad engineers would receive each month. She was good at the job, of course. Mathematics came naturally to her, and pension calculations were just applied mathematics. She worked diligently, never complaining publicly about the gap between her aspiration and her reality. She was grateful to have employment when so many others had none. She understood that millions of Americans would have envied her steady government paycheck. but she never stopped hoping for something more, something that would truly challenge her remarkable mind. In 1939, Genevieve took a routine civil service examination, hoping to qualify for a pay raise. The federal government used standardized tests to assess employee capabilities and determine advancement opportunities. The mathematics portion of the exam was designed to identify government employees with exceptional quantitative aptitude. When the results came back, Genevieve's scores were extraordinary. They were so far above the average that they attracted attention, far beyond the Railroad Retirement Board. Her scores suggested someone with genuine mathematical talent, perhaps someone who was drastically underemployed calculating pension benefits. At that time, a brilliant and unconventional man named William Friedman was building something new for the United States Army. Friedman headed the Signal Intelligence Service, a small and deeply secret organization dedicated to breaking the codes and ciphers of foreign nations. He was widely considered the greatest American cryptanalyst of his generation, a man who had pioneered mathematical techniques for attacking complex cipher systems. His textbooks on cryptanalysis were used to train generations of codebreakers. His theoretical insights had transformed the field from an art into a science, and Friedman was always searching for talented people to join his team. He discovered that traditional credentials mattered far less in codebreaking than raw intellectual ability. A person with a doctorate in mathematics might lack the intuition needed to spot patterns in ciphertext. Meanwhile, someone who'd never been to graduate school might possess exactly the kind of mind that could see what others missed. Friedman recruited mathematicians and language experts, musicians, and crossword puzzle enthusiasts. He looked for people who thought differently, who approached problems from unusual angles. When Friedman saw Genevieve Grotjan's test scores, he recognized potential. Here was someone with genuine mathematical ability, exactly the kind of mind that might succeed where others had failed. He made inquiries about her background. He discovered that she was working as a statistical clerk, a position far beneath her demonstrated capabilities. He arranged an interview. The meeting must have been strange for Genevieve. Friedman couldn't tell her much about the actual work. The very existence of the Signal Intelligence Service was classified. He could only speak in generalities about mathematical analysis and pattern recognition, but whatever he said was enough. In 1939, he offered Genevieve Grotjan a position as a junior cryptanalyst. Genevieve knew almost nothing about codebreaking. She'd never studied cryptanalysis. She had no background in languages or intelligence work. She'd never even heard of the Signal Intelligence Service before Friedman contacted her. But Friedman wasn't looking for experience. He was looking for raw intellectual capability. He would provide the training himself. What he needed was someone with the mental agility to spot patterns in apparent randomness, someone with the patience to work through impossibly tedious calculations, someone who wouldn't give up when the problem seemed hopeless. Genevieve Grotjan had proven she had all of these qualities. Her years at the Railroad Retirement Board had tested her patience and persistence. Her mathematical training had honed her analytical abilities. Her experience with disappointment had taught her to keep working even when success seemed unlikely. She was exactly what Friedman was looking for. When Genevieve arrived at the Signal Intelligence Service in 1939, she entered a world unlike anything she'd known. The organization operated in strict secrecy from the munitions building in Washington, a temporary structure that had been erected during the First World War and somehow never torn down. The work was classified at the highest levels. Employees were forbidden from discussing anything about their activities with friends, family, or anyone outside the office. If asked what they did for a living, they were instructed to say they were clerks who sharpened pencils and emptied waste baskets. The cover story was deliberately mundane, designed to bore anyone who might ask follow-up questions. In reality, the people behind those desks were engaged in some of the most intellectually demanding work being done anywhere in the world. The team she joined was remarkably small considering the enormity of its mission. William Friedman had assembled a handful of brilliant specialists, people who thought differently, who approached problems from unusual angles. Frank Rowlett, a former mathematics teacher from a small town in Virginia, led the team attacking Japanese ciphers. He'd been one of Friedman's first recruits back in 1930, when the Signal Intelligence Service was just getting started. Rowlett had a natural gift for cryptanalysis and the determination to stick with a problem, for months or years if necessary. Leo Rosen was an electrical engineering student from MIT whose understanding of machines would prove essential in the months ahead. Abraham Sinkov and Solomon Kullback were mathematicians from New York City, who'd become expert cryptanalysts under Friedman's tutelage. Robert Ferner and Albert Small were also part of the team, contributing their own specialized skills to the collective effort. These men had already achieved significant success. They'd broken the previous Japanese diplomatic cipher, a system Americans called red because they kept their files on it in red folders. That earlier breakthrough had given American intelligence valuable access to Tokyo's communications for several years. Diplomatic negotiations, strategic assessments, reports from Japanese embassies around the world had all been readable thanks to the red braid. But when Japan introduced purple in February of 1939, everything changed. The new system was vastly more sophisticated than red. The techniques that had worked against the older cipher proved useless against its replacement. Purple was a wall that no one could climb. Genevieve was assigned to the team attacking purple. She began learning the fundamentals of cryptanalysis from Friedman himself, absorbing his methods, studying how cipher machines worked, developing an intuition for the subtle patterns that could reveal a system's secrets. It was intellectually demanding work, requiring both mathematical rigor and creative thinking. A codebreaker needed to be systematic enough to process thousands of messages without making errors, but also imaginative enough to try approaches that had never been attempted before. She discovered that she loved it. This was the challenge she'd been seeking, something worthy of her abilities. For the first time since graduating from Buffalo, she felt that her talents were being properly used. The problems she worked on were genuinely difficult. They required everything she had, and they mattered. The fate of nations might depend on breaking purple. The problem the team faced was formidable. They knew that purple divided the alphabet into two groups, 6 letters that were enciphered by one mechanism, and 20 letters that were enciphered by another. They'd figured out relatively quickly how the 6-letter group was scrambled. That part of the system was similar to techniques they'd seen before, but the 20-letter group remained completely impenetrable, no matter what approaches they tried. The larger group's encryption pattern refused to yield its secrets. The 20 letters seemed to be processed through something far more complex than anything they'd previously encountered. Month after month, the team worked without breakthrough. They analyzed thousands of intercepted messages. They built statistical tables tracking letter frequencies and correlations. They tested theories about the machine's internal workings and watched them fail. Friedman drove himself relentlessly, and the strain began to take a terrible toll on his health. The pressure of knowing that war was approaching, that lives might depend on breaking purple, that failure meant American forces would face the enemy blind, wore him down physically and mentally. He worked 18-hour days. He barely slept. He obsessed over the problem even when he was supposed to be resting. Eventually, the stress would send Friedman to a psychiatric hospital with a complete nervous breakdown. The man who'd built American code-breaking would be temporarily destroyed by the code he couldn't break. But before that collapse, there was still work to be done, and Genevieve Grodjen was doing it. By the summer of 1940, the situation had grown desperate. Europe was falling to Nazi Germany. France had surrendered in June, stunning the world. Britain stood alone against Hitler, its cities being bombed nightly in the Blitz. The Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact with Germany and was busy carving up Eastern Europe. Democracy itself seemed to be in retreat everywhere, and in the Pacific, Japan was growing more aggressive by the day. The Japanese had occupied French Indochina after France's defeat. They were clearly preparing for further expansion. American military leaders needed to know what Tokyo was planning. The purple cipher was their best hope of finding out, and it remained unbroken. Leo Rosen had suggested that purple might use telephone stepping switches, rather than the rotating wheels of Enigma-style dial machines. This insight had given the team a new direction to explore. Frank Rowlett had even built a crude device, using stepping switches to test whether the theory might work. The results were promising but incomplete. They could explain some features of purple, but not the crucial 20-letter mechanism. Genevieve's approach to the problem was methodical and patient.